Alice. We're ready to go. Excellent. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Katharine Hayhoe from the other side of the world to talk to us this afternoon. She tells us on her website that originally she started her academic career in physics and astronomy, and then went to an inspirational class on climate change, and that changed the whole direction of her career. And she's done some amazing things in the world of climate change. Her research work has been used to report to the US Global Change Research Program. Together with her husband, who is a pastor, they have written a book entitled Climate for Change, Global Warming Facts for Faith-Based Decisions. And her talk to us this afternoon is entitled Climate Change, Facts, Fictions, and Our Faith. Katharine, you're very welcome.
Thank you. So I am speaking to you from Texas right now. I'm originally from Canada, and I'm going back there for the summer shortly. But we are going to push the limits of technology even further. It's not just video that we're going to do, but we're also going to do a little bit more. So if you don't mind showing me by show of hands, who has a smartphone or a laptop with them? Okay, good. So most people. All right, take out your phone. Now, you can also turn the ringer off if you have not done that already, but go ahead and take out your phone because we are going to use them. So what I'm going to do is share my screen now here, and I want you to go on your phone or your laptop, go to polev.com/Texas Tech. That's the name of the university that I work at. So my account has my university on it. So polev.com/Texas Tech. It will ask you for your name, but don't worry about that. Anonymous is fine. And when you have done that, you will see a map. And what you need to do is you need to touch on the map where you are originally from. So once you have gone to, oh, we have UK, we have, it looks like Georgia, Scotland, excellent, Southeast Asia, India, Brazil, Portugal. This is good. This is almost like a geography test. Can you name all the countries people are from? So I expected a few from the UK, but we're actually seeing quite a few from other places around the world as well. Great. Oh, there's one from the Northeast US as well. A few more from the UK. You're very good with those fingers. I can see that they're coming from very specific places in the countries. China. Oh, looks like Colorado maybe. Excellent. Okay. I just wanted to get a sense of where people were from, and now I'm going to ask you a second question. This is like a warm-up to make sure that you can, you feel comfortable using this. Here's my second question. We are at the end of a week of fascinating lectures. I read all of the abstracts to the lectures, and I wish I could have been there for every single one of them. So let me ask you this question. Do you feel like you've learned the most from the lectures on what? The ones on Monday that were on science and belief, answer A. The ones on Tuesday that were on origins, you'd answer B. The ones on Thursday were about the brain, DNA, and the body, answer C. And the ones that you've had so far on Friday, up till now, have been on ethics. So this is totally anonymous, so you can be completely honest. What have you learned the most from? All right, isn't this interesting? So you can see these numbers updating, right? Yep. Yes, you have to say verbally yes, because I can't see you right now. Yes? No. Oh, is that a no? Yes. Oh my goodness, that's awful. Okay, let's try this again because I can see them updating and it's fascinating. Let me see. Okay, so stop share. Okay, let me try sharing again. I'll share my whole desktop this time. I'm glad I asked. And now I'll try this again. Play from current slide. Okay, so just give it a minute here. Okay, can you see the answers now? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, you're getting the idea. It's sort of like going to church. All right, so let me go backwards so you can see the map, because the map was actually really cool. Just give it a minute here. So this is the map, and you can see all the little green dots where people are from, and just checking, you can see the green dots, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then these are your answers to which lectures you've learned the most on. So 15% the science and belief, 41% origins, 30% the body, and 15% ethics so far. Excellent. So my lecture today is on climate change. That is what I study, the facts, the fictions, and our faith. So now I want to ask you a different question, one related specifically to this topic. When I say the words climate change, what is the first thing that you think of? Now, you can answer with one word, or if you're going to answer with multiple words, you have to join them with a dot, and you will see why in a minute when the answers start coming up on the screen. So when I say climate change, what is the first word that comes into your head? Or multiple words. And there, that person did the right thing. They joined their words with a dot. All right, so we have global warming, concern, flooding, conservation, irreversible damages, breakdown, catastrophe, disaster, unbearable, conservation, heat, yes. All right, just to check, are you seeing these words appear on your screen?
Yes.
All right. Oh, I like that veggie burger. Yes. Greenhouse gases. Oh, Trump and old people versus Greta and the youth. That's a good one. Biodiversity loss, creation, future. So the ones that we're seeing emerging here are flooding, heat, and disasters. And that is definitely what we are seeing around the world. So to begin sort of at the beginning, we don't often think of our planet as this amazing gift, but just think about it. We would not have our physical life if we did not have this planet. We were not created to float around in outer space. There is nothing there that will sustain life. Everything that we have to sustain life is on our planet that we believe God has given us. What does our planet provide for us? It provides air to breathe, water to drink. It provides food to eat and a safe place to live. That's not all, though. Our planet also provides beauty. It provides beauty in the places where you are in Cambridgeshire. It provides beauty in the places where I live. This is Texas. Now, just checking. You can see these images, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. So we all learn in Sunday school and Bible class and sermons in church, we all learn that God created human beings in his image, but very rarely, if ever, do we ever attend a sermon, a lecture, a class that explains why. Yet the Bible explains why. There's a so that after that, and the so that says this. It says, so that we can be responsible for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. So from the moment of our creation, the idea that we are stewards or responsible, or as it says later in Genesis 2, gardeners of this amazing home that God has given us, is central to our identity and our role and our purpose on this planet. Some people say, well, you know, in certain translations it talks about dominion, so that means that we can do whatever we want, right? Well, when you think about the word dominion, imagine if you were given a piece of property by someone who you love and respect more than anyone else in the world, and they gave you complete dominion over that property. And it was a property that they themselves loved, and they cared for, and they had poured all of their creative genius into this land. And when you were given dominion over it, you extracted every cent of worth that you could, every penny of value from that land, and you left it a crumbling ruin. We know instinctively that if somebody did that today, they would not be fulfilling the mandate of dominion that the person had entrusted them with when they gave them that land. Rather, we know that if we are given a piece of land and we invest in it and we make it fertile and it becomes a place where you can grow crops, where there are natural ecosystems to sustain wildlife, that provides jobs for people and safe places for people to live, then we are fulfilling that mandate that we have been given by the person from whom we inherited this land. So in the Bible, it talks about responsibility and trust. It talks about how we are to be faithful to trust that we have been given. And it talks about gifts. Now, often this verse typically refers to spiritual gifts, that we should use whatever spiritual gift we have received. But again, what bigger physical gift have we been given than this planet? And we are to use our gifts to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace. So this concept is where the idea of responsibility comes from, the idea that if we live in rich countries, we are using far more of the world's resources than people who live in poor countries. If you look at how many planets we would need to support your lifestyle, I did this myself a few years ago, and I was horrified to find that even my own life, which I have thought very carefully about in terms of how we use our resources, even my own life, we would require 4 planets to support everyone on the planet currently living the life that I live, 4.5 actually, and I need 23 acres of land only to sustain my life and the resources that it needs. That's pretty amazing, pretty stunning, pretty shocking when you think about it. So this is where the idea of caring for creation has come from. The idea that we are to be stewards, that we are to conserve the resources, that we are to manage them for the benefits not just of other humans, but of every living thing on this planet. And Dave Bookless, some of you may be familiar with him. Dave Bookless is the theology director for Arasha. He is based in the UK. He is an Anglican minister as well as working in conservation. And he's made this handy set of figures, I think, that really explain our role as humans in creation and how we think about it. So often today, so many people take an egotistical perspective of creation, as if it is a pyramid and humans are at the top, and that means that we can use creation for whatever purpose we want. That is an egotistical perspective that ignores Genesis 1 that says that we are to be responsible for every living thing. But then you can take a secular ecological perspective where we are the same as anything else. We are equal to the squid and the snake and the mushroom and the dog and the jellyfish and the shark. And that is not what we as Christians believe either. Rather, our perspective is one of love based on the responsibility that God has given to us. Not that we are at the top where we are benefiting from everything else, but rather we are to be supporters of, caretakers of, responsibility for every living thing. So because of that, climate change is clearly a conservation issue. We are, from the beginning of creation, to be responsible for, to conserve the resources that God has given us for the benefit of every living thing. And you've already heard this today, perhaps in different words, but you've heard this concept of climate change being a conservation issue. But it is not only a conservation issue. And what I want to do today is I want to walk through all of the different issues that climate change is. So the second thing we know is that climate change is clearly affecting our environment. Our use of fossil fuels, their impact on the environment, and the impact of a warming planet on natural ecosystems is unavoidable. It's evident in headlines today every year around the world. Whether it's looking at the impact that rising ocean temperatures are having on coral bleaching, whether it's looking at the fact that we could see widespread extinction as climate changes so quickly that many species, both animals and plants, cannot adapt and cannot move fast enough, whether it's the impacts of burning fossil fuels, oil spills, or this is an image of the Appalachian Mountains in the eastern US, or as they get the coal, they cut the tops off the mountains, which causes enormous environmental degradation, as you can imagine. So the extraction of fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels, and the impact of the burning of fossil fuels that releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that is wrapping an extra blanket around the planet, causing the planet to warm, all of these, when you put them together, are clearly causing environmental issues. But that is not all either. What more is there? Lots. When we cut the tops off mountains to remove the coal more cheaply and more easily, it is poisoning the local waterways. And as my friend Marianne writes, what this is doing is it allows toxic heavy metals to leach into local water supplies. And so people who live in those areas, often who are not well off economically, who work in that industry, are being affected with higher incidence of cancer, heart disease, kidney disease, birth defects, and many other issues. When we look around the world, places like Nigeria, the Niger Delta is one of the largest sources of oil and gas in Africa. There's study after study after study showing the health implications of oil and gas extraction in the Niger Delta on maternal health, on infant mortality. In fact, there are so many studies on this one area alone looking at the health impacts of fossil fuel extraction that there's even a Wikipedia entry only on this topic. And it is called environmental issues, but I would say no, it shouldn't be called environmental issues, it should be called health issues. Because environmental issues somehow implies it's about the environment, not us. But it is about us. We are the ones being affected. All of us, of course, the plants, the animals, but also the humans are being intimately affected by these issues. What happens when we burn fossil fuels? When we burn them, we produce all kinds of pollutants that we breathe in. And we know today that air pollution and soil and water pollution as well, that arises primarily from industrial activities, which are very related to burning fossil fuels, we know that they kill people. A study 3 years ago found that air pollution was killing more than 5 million people around the world every year, but they updated this study just this year, and they found that the estimates were double. Air pollution is killing almost 9 million people around the world every year, and in fact, 1 in 6 deaths worldwide is the result of some type of pollution, air, water, or soil. So climate change is absolutely an environmental issue and a conservation issue, but it is also a health issue. Not just a health issue, but a justice issue. Because when you look at who is dying from and who is affected by pollution, even in rich countries, many people are, but those people are the people who cannot afford to live somewhere better, who cannot afford to make the choices that would reduce their exposure to these pollutants. So climate change, again, it's a conservation issue, yes. It is an environmental issue, yes. But it is also a health issue. Increasingly, one of the greatest health issues that confronts us today, if you everything from the extraction of fossil fuels, the combustion of fossil fuels, and the impacts that climate change is having on our health through increases in extreme heat, stronger weather disasters, and many more. The list isn't done yet, though. There's a few more things on the list. One of the biggest ways that climate change, the impacts of climate change, not digging up fossil fuels and burning them, but the actual resulting warming of the planet is affecting us, is through loading the weather dice against us. What do I mean by that? Well, we always have a chance of rolling a double six, no matter where we live. A double six could be a strong heat wave, or a record-breaking drought, or a devastating cyclone, or typhoon, or hurricane, or a heavy rainfall event and flood. This is natural, and we always have a chance of rolling that double six naturally. But as climate changes, all of that extra energy in the system, decade by decade, is sneaking in and taking one of those numbers and turning it into a six as well. So all of a sudden, we're noticing that we have a much greater chance of rolling a double six today than we did 20, 30, 50, or 100 years ago. Not only that, but we're starting to see some double sevens show up. Some record-breaking events that are far beyond anything that we have experienced in the history of human civilization on this planet. And we say, well, how could the city of Houston have, which is in Texas where I live, how could they have 3 500-year flood events in 3 years. A 500-year flood event does not happen 3 times in 3 years. Why? Because the dice are being loaded against us. So what used to be a 500-year flood event is now maybe a 50-year flood event, maybe even a 10-year flood event. The odds or the risks are being altered by a changing climate. Let me give you some specific examples. I talked earlier already about Houston. Now, look at Bangladesh and India. Is the monsoon a natural part of their climate? Yes, of course it is. The monsoon is a natural part of their rainfall cycle in Southeast Asia. But is it natural for 1/3 of the entire country of Bangladesh to be underwater as it was 2 years ago in September during the monsoon season? No, that is not natural. That is not normal. We see record-breaking floods in places from the US Midwest to Indonesia. How is this related to a warming climate? It's because warmer air holds more water vapor. So the warmer it gets, the more water vapor there is in the atmosphere. And when a storm comes along, as it always does naturally, there's more water vapor for that storm to sweep up and dump on us today than there was 50 or 100 years ago. So when a storm comes along, there is a greater risk of more intense precipitation today than there was 50 or 100 years ago because it's warmer. We know also that droughts are a normal part of life, but we are seeing increasingly devastating droughts around the world, from Spain in the upper left, where last summer the drought was so severe that it actually exposed buildings from the times of the Romans because the level of the aquifer dropped lower than they'd seen in hundreds of years. Over on the right-hand side is a picture of the record-breaking drought in California that devastated the economy of that state from 2011 to 2017. We have had terrible droughts in Texas on the left and in Syria on the right. Now, again, droughts are normal and droughts are natural. But the warmer it gets, again, the more water evaporates out of our lakes and our reservoirs and our streams. And during a drought, you have a high pressure system sitting over the region that directs the storms away from the region. So when it's warmer, you have more water evaporating, you have the atmosphere holding more water vapor, but if there's no storm coming along to collect that water vapor and dump it on us, then the drought is more prolonged and more severe. And ironically, the hotter it gets and the drier it gets, it actually reinforces the high pressure system sitting over the region, making droughts longer and stronger today than they would have been 50 or 100 years ago in many regions. What about wildfire? Well, you may have seen the headlines this past year of the terrible wildfires that they had in the western United States and particularly in California. Now, again, wildfire is a normal part of the ecosystem in that region of North America. All the way up the western US and Canada, wildfire is part of the ecosystem and it actually serves an important role. But what we're seeing, and I'm sorry that the axes got cut off here, this is showing from 1980 until 2015. What we're seeing is that the area burned by wildfire in the western United States has effectively doubled as a result of a changing climate. So without a changing climate, there would be about 12 million acres burned. And with a changing climate, it's at about 24. So double the amount of area burned, the dice are being loaded against us. What about cyclones and typhoons and hurricanes? The same storm, just different names depending on where they occur in the world. So these are very unique storms that draw their energy from warm ocean water. The warmer the ocean, the more energy is available to these storms. We do not see these storms becoming more frequent because whether these storms form or not is not a function of how warm the ocean is. The ocean has to be above a certain level to have the storms form, but then it's a complex mix of dynamics. And in fact, in the future, we might actually see less of these storms as climate changes. But they are changing. They have a lot more rainfall associated with them. They are intensifying a lot faster because there's more energy available to them through the warm ocean water. There's more of them that are stronger. So there's the same number today as there was 50 or 100 years ago, but of that number, more of them are stronger and less are weaker today. They're also moving more slowly, which means they can sit over a certain region and dump more rainfall on that region. And they're getting bigger. And of course, sea level is rising as well. And as the oceans warm, these storms can move further north because they get their energy from warm ocean water, and the warmer the ocean, the further north or the further poleward they can move. We had a terrible hurricane 2 years ago in August in Texas. It hit the city of Houston again, and scientific studies have showed that an estimated 38%, almost 40% of the rain that fell during Hurricane Harvey would not have fallen if the same storm had occurred 100 years ago. So that's how the dice are being loaded against us. They're being loaded against us if we live in North America, and they're being loaded against us if we live in Europe and the UK. The most recent study looking at the June heat wave that just occurred in Europe, where temperature records, especially across France, but also across other areas, were just absolutely smashed by multiple degrees. The most recent study found that depending on what part of the continent you are on, such a heat wave has become anywhere from 5 to 100 times more likely as a result of a changing climate. That's a lot of changes to the dice. They also found that the heat wave was likely 4 degrees warmer than it would have been without a changing climate. So no matter where we live, climate change is weighting the dice against us. It is increasing the risks that we face no matter where we live. And as the Prime Minister of Dominica, which is one of the Caribbean islands that was devastated by the 2017 hurricane season, said, he said, to deny climate change today is to deny a truth that we have just lived. So climate change is not just a conservation issue, an environmental issue, a health issue. It is a risk issue. It is a threat multiplier. It takes the naturally occurring risks that we already face where we live, and it amplifies them, making some of them more frequent, some of them bigger, some of them stronger, some of them more intense. Today, no matter where we live, we have seen the impacts of a changing climate. So here's my next question to you. How do you see climate change affecting the place where you live? If you're going to use multiple words, make sure you have a dot in between them. What is it that you are seeing where you live? Where I live, we are seeing both ends of the spectrum increasing. So we are seeing our droughts getting stronger and longer, and we're also seeing our heavy rainfall increase. We always have this kind of feast or famine pattern of water in Texas, but as climate changes, it's getting bigger. Oh, the weather is nicer. You are lucky. Yes. Less rain, bushfires, hurricanes, flooding, extreme temperatures, hotter. The drought 2 years ago, yes. A weather change. Yeah. I have a series on YouTube called Global Weirding. It's a little series of videos that answer frequently asked questions about climate change, and we specifically called it Global Weirding because that's often how we see climate change affecting us in the places where we live. I like that. Absurdly hot summers, yes. Longer and more humid summer, too hot, failing crops. Invasive species, yep. So flooding and warmer is what's coming out here. But today, again, as the Prime Minister of Dominica said, we can see these impacts in the places where we live. All right, that's not all. I'm not done. There's 2 more here on our list. So moving on, looking not just at the places where we live, but around the world. This is a map of where people live in poverty around the world. So the darker the color, the greater the percentage of the population that lives in poverty in that region. Now, fix the pattern in your mind, the geographic pattern of where the dark and where the light is, because I also want to show you where people are most vulnerable to the impacts of a changing climate. What do you see when you look at these 2 maps? They pretty much overlap. Why is that? It's because if we are already poor if we are already living on a tiny amount of money a day, if when our crops fail, we have no way to feed our family, if as sea levels rise, we have nowhere to move, we are the most vulnerable to a changing climate. Climate change is not just a risk multiplier, it is a threat multiplier. And growing up myself in Colombia, this is a picture of me and many of my friends and my family, growing up in South America as a young child and a teen, and many of you have experienced this yourself personally in your own lives, we know that when we live in homes that are made of fragile materials, when we don't have a lot of resources, when disaster strikes, when we live on the side of a mountain, and when the heavy rains come, we have no resources. Our homes are washed away. People are devastated. When events like, for example, Hurricane Matthew, when Hurricane Matthew hit the United States, it was responsible for 30 deaths, and it was responsible for several $billion worth of damage. But when it hit Haiti, it exacerbated the already pre-existing cholera epidemic, which killed almost 100,000 people. It devastated and destroyed a large proportion of the homes in the entire country. I mean, the devastation of the same event happening in a country where people have resources versus a country where people do not have resources is orders of magnitude different. So for many places and for many people, climate change is like a hole in the bucket. In other words, we're trying to fix and we're concerned about poverty or hunger or lack of access to clean water or people dying of diseases that nobody should be dying from in 2019. So we're already putting all of our efforts into eradicating poverty and hunger and diseases. But climate change is the hole in the bucket. It is making these things worse. It's estimated that since 1980, a changing climate has been responsible for about $5 billion US in crop losses per year. Most of those crop losses occurring in countries where people cannot afford them, where they do not have other resources to cope with when they lose their harvest. So climate change is a threat multiplier exacerbating these issues, a hole in the bucket that is getting bigger and bigger over time. So often people say, well, I'm working on malaria, or I'm working on hunger, or I'm working on refugee crisis. And so I can't think about climate change now because I'm working on these things. But what I say to them is we have to work on both because climate change is making all of these things worse. And if we leave climate change out of the picture, the hole in the bucket will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where you will never be able to fill the bucket. Climate change truly is a threat multiplier. A recent study that just came out 2 months ago showed that climate change has already increased global economic inequality. Specifically, the author of the study, Marshall Burke, who's a colleague at Stanford University, he said that poor countries did not cause the problem. They are being harmed by it. There is a clear equity dimension here. And then a study by the International Monetary Fund in May found that the amount that we subsidize fossil fuels around the world, not just in the US, but around the world, adds up to about $200,000 US per second. And in the United States, fossil fuel subsidies exceed their Department of Defense spending. And you know how much the US spends on their military. They found that if fossil fuel prices had been set at a level that eliminated the subsidies just 4 years ago, global CO2 emissions would be 28% lower, deaths from air pollution would be reduced, tax revenues would be higher, and the net economic benefits would have been positive. So climate change is an economic issue. It is a hunger issue. It is a poverty issue. It is a refugee issue. Climate change is a humanitarian issue. And because I couldn't fit all of those things on one slide, I simply said climate change is unjust. How does that relate to who we are and what we believe? Well, if you're like me, your mind probably jumped right to Micah 6:8, where it says, He, God, has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. So why is it that we care? Who we are, why do we care? We care because of who we are and because of who God has made us. So we care about a changing climate, first of all, because God has made us responsible for the welfare of every living thing on this planet, because climate change is a conservation, an environmental, and a human issue. But we also care about it because it exacerbates so many of the risks that we already face today. It takes the risks that we face from naturally occurring weather events and it makes them worse. But even more importantly, it takes issues like hunger and poverty and disease and political instability that make refugee crises happen. It takes these things and it makes them worse. So we care about a changing climate because it affects real people today, especially the poor and the vulnerable, and that is not fair. So lastly, how are we then to respond? How are we to act? And there too, we have guidance from our faith. So often we are overwhelmed with fear and with guilt. When climate change comes up, we feel fearful of the impacts. We feel like, I'm just one person, what can I do? And we feel guilty because we know that our lifestyle is contributing to this problem. But fear and guilt paralyze us, and God knows this. So what we believe that is so different than what anyone else believes is we believe that we have actually been freed from guilt to love, and we have been freed from fear to hope. My favorite verse related to these issues comes from the book of Timothy, where Paul is writing to Timothy, who he was mentoring, and he specifically says, God has not given us the spirit of fear. So if our reaction to these issues is fear, we know we have a litmus test in the Bible, in God's word, telling us that that fear is not from God. What does come from God? That's what the rest of the verse tells us. We have power. What is power? Power is the ability to act. If we are empowered, we are able to act. And that is the opposite of being paralyzed or frozen in fear. So we have the ability to act, and that is a gift from God. And then we have the ability to love, to think of others, to have compassion for others, to consider others' needs above our own. That is a gift that we have from God. And then lastly, as scientists, we have to love the last one. We have been given a sound mind to make good decisions based on accurate information. And that sound mind is also a gift from God. So what are we supposed to do about it, though? It's all very well to say we're supposed to act in love with a sound mind, but what does that look like? I want to close with a few examples for you. Now, these are not prescriptive because everybody is different. We have different abilities, we have different skills, we have different experiences, and God has made us that way deliberately. The image that God uses for us is that of a body, where one person is the liver, the other person is a heart, somebody is a finger or a toe, somebody else is part of the brain. So we are all different and we all have different ways that we can contribute, and there is no 10 commandments of thou shalt do this. But what I want to offer is I want to offer you suggestions to start the thinking about it. What can I personally do? There's a whole range of things that we can do. Some may be perfect for one person, some for another. But when we look at what we should do, it should be guided by power, by love, and by a sound mind. So for example, we can certainly act individually. Now, people always talk about changing light bulbs, and light bulbs do make a difference. People talk about recycling, and recycling does make a difference. I recycle at my university, and they use the resources that they get from recycling to sponsor student scholarships. So it's a good thing no matter which way you do it. But a lot of how we eat also affects our personal emissions. Eating lower down the food chain, eating local food, and not wasting food are really important ways that we can act personally to reduce our carbon footprint. And looking at new technology, whether it's a plug-in car, whether it's taking public transportation if you don't need a car, whether it's the solar panels that my husband gave me for Christmas, and that's a picture of our roof right there. There are things that we can do individually that we can then talk about with people and share our stories. But as Christians, there's more to it than just acting individually. We are a body. We are a community. And so acting together in community is also very important. Whether it is our faith community, our church, our university, or our school, or even, as in this example, this is an online community where you sign up and every month you get an email with ideas of what you can do and what you can pray for that month. You can find them online at climatecaretakers.org if you're interested in signing up. So we can act individually, we can act in community, and we can also act wisely. This is one of my favorite people. He actually graduated from our university with a business degree, and then he went to do an MDiv at a seminary. And while he was doing his Master's of Divinity, he wanted to support himself, to pay for his tuition and his living expenses. So Colby started an energy consulting company, and it turned into his mission. So now he goes between churches and seminaries and schools, and he helps them to reduce their energy use, to reduce their carbon footprint, to save their money so that they can spend more money helping people, which is what they actually want to do. And that is his mission, helping people to use their resources wisely. Another way to act wisely is to recognize, if we are in a position to make decisions, that how we get our energy is changing. And today, as this article says that was just from this past year, today the cost of energy has changed so much that now in many parts of the world, wind and solar energy, even with storage, because of course the wind does not always blow and the sun does not always shine, even with storage, it is reaching the cost of natural gas. When we look around the entire world, in 2017, we don't have the numbers yet for 2018, in 2017, 70% of new energy around the world was renewable. And just today, I read in the news, the stock exchange has decided to, instead of calling fossil fuels coal and oil and gas, they have just decided to call them non-renewable fuels. And I think that that's a very important change in language, because renewable versus non-renewable relates directly to conservation. Renewable is conservative. It conserves. Non-renewable is not. What else can we do? We can also act globally. So when I do travel, I don't travel very much because I do about 80% of my talks like this. But when I do travel, and I was in Cambridge in May because I had enough events in one place to where I could stay in London and just travel by train to many different events in the same week. When I do travel, I use climate stewards to offset my carbon footprint. And what do they do with that money? They actually invest in people's lives in Uganda and Kenya and Ghana and in Mexico. And then finally, we can act comprehensively. Project Drawdown is an amazing resource that gives examples of comprehensive solutions to climate change. You can find them online at drawdown.org. And what they have done is they have taken the top 100 solutions to climate change and they have ranked them in order. Now on this list are some of the things that you would expect. So on the list you have offshore wind turbines, rooftop solar. Those are all things that are on the list. But also on the list, number 72, is biochar. What is biochar? It's when you take agricultural residue and you burn it at high temperatures, so the carbon that was in that agricultural residue comes out as a black powder, and you plow it back into the soil, as they've been doing in the Amazon jungle for hundreds of years, and it is like Miracle Grow on steroids, because carbon in the atmosphere, too much of it is bad for us, but carbon in the soil is actually very good. So putting carbon back in the soil helps us grow crops, especially in average or marginal lands. It's a very cheap way to fertilize the ground. You can do it anywhere in the world, but it also helps to reduce global warming. Number 21 is clean cook stove projects. So instead of cutting down trees and brush, people can actually use clean cook stoves to cook their food, and it also cuts down on indoor air pollution, which is responsible, specifically, cook stoves are responsible for millions of deaths per year. Number 6 is kind of surprising, educating women and girls, especially in poor countries. Because the more educated a woman is, the more choices she's able to make to support her family, her babies live longer, infant mortality rates decline, and she's able to support her family and make decisions that actually reduce carbon emissions. And then number 3 might be the most surprising one. If food waste were its own country, it would be number 3 in terms of heat trapping gas emissions produced worldwide after China and the United States. Food waste. But because of that, it's also solution number 3. By reducing food waste, we can also reduce local hunger, and we can cut down on the greenhouse gas emissions from the decay of organic material, which is what happens when the food is just thrown away. In rich countries, we throw away about 1/3 of our food. But lastly, and most importantly, we need to act lovingly, because climate change is a human issue. It is affecting real people today, whether it's decreasing their water supply, whether it's increasing the severity of tropical storms that are harming people today. It is also providing opportunities, new ways to grow our food, new ways to grow our energy that are available to all. So when we think about climate change, I hope I've opened the window of what it looks like. And I hope I've showed you that climate change and climate solutions look very different, no matter where we live around the world. But there is that better future for us. If we can transition from the old ways of getting energy that we've been using since the Industrial Revolution to new clean ways of energy that people can use around the world, even in countries where they do not have fossil fuels. By doing so, we can change the world. And it's who we're made to be. Because caring about God's creation and the people and other living things that are already being affected by climate change today, this is a genuine expression of our faith. It is a faithful acceptance of the responsibility that God has given us. And most importantly, it is a true expression of God's love. So that's why when I talk about climate change, I feel like the best title is the one that, not the one I started with, but the one that I want to end with. The only thing that counts is when our faith expresses itself through love, the Apostle Paul tells us. So caring about climate change is about loving our global neighbor. Thank you.